In the early 1970s, McDonnell Douglas had a decision to make. With the DC-10 trijet nearing production and the wide-body market still taking shape, the company explored a parallel design, a two-engine variant of the DC-10, optimized for efficiency and aimed squarely at domestic and transcontinental routes. They called it the DC-10 Twin. It was a practical idea, a wide-body twin jet with lower fuel consumption, high parts commonality, and appeal to major U.S. carriers like American, Delta, and Pan Am. At a time when Lockheed was struggling with delays and Boeing was focused on the oversized 747, the DC-10 Twin could have filled a gap no one else was addressing. But it never made it past the drawing board. Internal disagreements, shifting priorities, and a reluctance to commit to a second major program meant the DC-10 Twin was quietly shelved. And in the years that followed, the opportunity it represented slipped away, first to Airbus, then to Boeing. This is the story of a jet that never flew, a missed chance that might have changed the course of commercial aviation, and a decision that helped bring down one of America's most storied aircraft manufacturers. By the mid-1960s, Douglas Aircraft was in trouble. The company had a backlog of orders for its DC-9 twin jet but lacked the production capacity to meet demand. Delays mounted, lawsuits followed, and the financial strain became unsustainable. In 1967, Douglas merged with McDonnell Aircraft, one of the United States' leading military contractors. The deal was less a partnership than a rescue. McDonnell brought capital, political influence, and a steady stream of defense contracts. Douglas brought a respected name in commercial aviation and a product line in need of modernization. The new company, McDonnell Douglas, wasted no time. The DC-8, Douglas's aging four-engine jetliner, was nearing the end of its commercial relevance. The market was shifting toward wide-body aircraft, larger jets with greater capacity designed to meet the growing demand for air travel in the jet age. But there was a problem. A long-standing FAA regulation known as the 60-minute rule restricted twin-engine aircraft from flying more than an hour away from a diversion airport. It was a holdover from an era when jet engine reliability was still in question. As a result, any aircraft intended for long-haul or over-water routes needed at least 3 engines. So while McDonnell Douglas engineers were well aware of the fuel efficiency advantages of a twin jet, they knew that any new wide-body design would have to be a trijet, at least for now. Still, they kept the idea alive, and when Airbus began developing its own twin-engine wide-body in Toulouse, McDonnell Douglas saw an opportunity, not just to compete, but to collaborate. In 1968, McDonnell Douglas approached Airbus with a proposition: a joint venture to build the world's first wide-body twin jet. The idea was to combine Douglas's experience in fuselage design with Airbus's emerging work on wings and propulsion. The result would be a hybrid aircraft, essentially a DC-10 fuselage mated to the wings, engines, and tailplane of what would become the Airbus A300. Internally, the project was designated Model D699. James McDonnell, chairman of the newly merged company, proposed a 50-50 partnership. It was a pragmatic move. Airbus was still in its infancy, and a collaboration with an established American manufacturer could have fast-tracked the A300's development while giving Douglas a foothold in the European market. But Airbus wasn't interested. Henry Ziegler, Airbus's CEO, had no intention of handing over Europe's first major civil aviation project to an American firm. Ziegler was politically connected, close to French President Charles de Gaulle, and had already played a key role in salvaging the troubled Concorde program. For him, Airbus wasn't just a business venture, it was a statement of European independence. France, riding high on post-war economic growth, was determined to challenge American dominance in aviation, and the A300 was its flagship effort. There was no chance it would be co-branded with an American manufacturer. Still, the talks weren't a total loss. McDonnell Douglas agreed to share its pylon and nacelle design for the DC-10 CF6 engines, allowing Airbus to adopt the same configuration for the A300. It was a small concession, but one that would come back to haunt Douglas in the years ahead. With the door to Europe closed, McDonnell Douglas turned inward. If Airbus wouldn't build a twin jet with them, they'd build one on their own. And so, the DC-10 Twin was born. On October 4, 1971, McDonnell Douglas formally announced its intention to develop a two-engine variant of the DC-10. Internally, it was seen as a strategic counter to the Airbus A300, a way to offer a more efficient widebody without abandoning the DC-10's core design. The proposed aircraft, unofficially dubbed the DC-10 Twin, would share nearly 90% of its components with the existing DC-10-30. It would be 14 feet shorter, with a slightly wider wingspan, and powered by either the General Electric CF650C or the Pratt & Whitney JT9D57, both engines capable of over 50,000 pounds of thrust. Seating capacity would range from 239 to 300 passengers, depending on configuration. The idea was simple: commonality. Pilots could be dual-rated to fly both the trijet and the twinjet. Maintenance crews could work on both with minimal retraining. Airlines could streamline their fleets without sacrificing performance. And the timing couldn't have been better. Lockheed's L-1010 TriStar was mired in delays following the bankruptcy of Rolls-Royce, its sole engine supplier. Boeing's 747, while revolutionary, was proving too large and too expensive for many routes. The DC-10 was already gaining traction in Europe, and the twinjet variant promised to expand that success into new markets. But inside McDonnell Douglas, not everyone was convinced. Jackson McOwen, president of the company, was a strong advocate for the DC-10 Twin. He believed it could be developed quickly and affordably, no more than $250 million. But John McDonnell, vice president of finance and son of the company's founder, was skeptical. He saw the twinjet as a costly duplication of effort and worried about direct competition with Airbus. The result was hesitation. Meetings dragged, approval stalled, and while Douglas engineers were ready to begin prototype assembly, the project remained stuck in limbo. It was a moment of opportunity, but instead of seizing it, McDonnell Douglas blinked, and the window began to close.
On July 30, 1973, McDonnell Douglas officially canceled the DC-10 Twin project. The decision came just months before the onset of the oil crisis, an event that would send fuel prices soaring and shift airline priorities almost overnight. Suddenly, fuel efficiency wasn't just a bonus, it was a necessity. And the wide-body twin jet, once seen as a gamble, became the industry's most sought-after configuration. Airbus, once dismissed as a European curiosity, found itself in the right place at the right time. The A300, with its two engines and lower operating costs, was no longer a niche product. It was a solution. And with the 60-minute rule still in place, Airbus focused on short and medium-haul routes, exactly where the DC-10 Twin would have thrived. McDonnell Douglas, meanwhile, was left with a trijet that suddenly looked outdated. The DC-10 continued to sell, but its momentum was fading, and the company had nothing in the pipeline to counter the growing appeal of the A300. Internally, the cancellation of the DC-10 Twin exposed deeper fractures. The Douglas side of the company had pushed hard for the project, citing interest from European carriers like Swissair, SAS, and the KSSU Group. But the McDonnell side, focused on domestic buyers and wary of risk, refused to move without firm commitments from U.S. airlines. In the end, neither side got what they wanted. The DC-10 Twin was shelved, Airbus gained a foothold in the American market, and McDonnell Douglas, once a leader in innovation, found itself reacting to trends it had once helped define. The moment had passed, but the idea of a wide-body twin jet wasn't dead, not yet. And in the wake of the DC-10's troubled service history, McDonnell Douglas would try again. By 1975, McDonnell Douglas was in damage control. The DC-10, once hailed as a promising alternative to the 747, had become a public relations liability. A series of fatal accidents, most notably caused by a design flaw in the cargo door, had shaken public confidence and cast doubt on the trijet concept itself. But the need for a fuel-efficient widebody hadn't gone away. If anything, the oil crisis had made it more urgent. Enter the DC-X200. This new design was smaller than the original DC-10 Twin, seating around 230 passengers in a mixed-class layout. It featured a shorter fuselage, 30 feet less than the DC-10, and a newly designed advanced technology wing. Power would come from CF6-45 engines rated at 45,000 pounds of thrust. Internally, the DC-X200 was based on a series of studies, D969L, M, P, and 969N4, but the company's financial position had weakened. Risk-sharing was now essential. McDonnell Douglas executives, including President John Brizendine and CEO Sandy McDonald, began touring Europe in search of a partner. They approached the British first. Talks with the struggling UK aerospace industry included a range of proposals: a Rolls-Royce-powered DC-10 30R for British Airways, a joint SST successor to Concorde, and even shared wing production between the DC-X200 and the A300. But the British declined. Next came the French. France, still reeling from the A300's poor early sales, was more receptive. By 1975, only 22 A300s had been sold, and 16 sat unsold in storage. The French government was eager to support its lagging commercial transport sector, and McDonnell Douglas emerged as a serious candidate for collaboration, especially compared to Lockheed, which was also in talks. In June 1976, Sandy McDonald announced a formal agreement with Dassault to co-develop an improved version of the Mercure, a regional twin jet that had failed to gain traction. But before the deal could progress, Europe pivoted. The Joint European Transport Project was launched, bringing together British Aerospace, Dornier, and Fokker. It would eventually become the Airbus A320. Once again, McDonnell Douglas was left out, and once again, the DC-X200 was shelved, this time not because of internal division, but because the market was moving faster than the company could keep up. By the late 1970s, the commercial aviation landscape was shifting, and fast. In 1978, the FAA replaced the long-standing 60-minute rule with a new framework, ETOPS, or Extended Range Twin Engine Operations Performance Standards. It was a quiet regulatory change, but its impact was seismic. For the first time, twin jets could operate over oceans and remote regions provided they met strict reliability standards. The Airbus A300, once confined to short-haul routes, was suddenly cleared for transatlantic service. And with that, the wide-body twin jet was no longer a niche, it was the future. Airbus, once ahead of the curve, was now behind it. Boeing seized the moment. On July 14, 1978, it announced a clean-sheet wide-body twin jet designed from the ground up for ETOPS operations. United Airlines placed 38 firm orders before the aircraft had even flown. Airbus responded with the A310, a shorter, longer-range derivative of the A300, tailored for thinner, long-haul routes. McDonnell Douglas, meanwhile, was still studying paper projects. Throughout 1979, engineers revisited earlier concepts, the D969E, the D969N21E for American Airlines, and the D969N21L with winglets. Later that year, a new proposal emerged, the D969N300, also known as the DC-X300. It was a last-ditch effort to stay relevant in a market that was rapidly slipping away. But none of these designs made it past the drawing board. The company's conservative financial strategy, once seen as prudent, had become a liability. While Boeing and Airbus committed to bold new programs, McDonnell Douglas hesitated, paralyzed by internal caution and a shrinking share of the market. The window for a competitive wide-body twin jet had closed, and the company that once helped define the jet age was now struggling just to keep up. With the Boeing and Airbus A310 gaining traction, McDonnell Douglas made one last attempt to re-enter the twin jet race. In November 1980, the company entered talks with Dutch aircraft manufacturer Fokker to co-develop a new wide-body, the DC-XX. The idea was to combine Douglas's earlier research from the DC-10 Twin with Fokker's work on the F-29, a proposed successor to the F-20 Fellowship. The resulting aircraft, later dubbed the MD-100, would feature a lengthened DC-10 fuselage paired with new wings, engines, and tailplane developed by Fokker. It was a promising concept. The MD-100 would have launched in 1983, but it never happened. McDonnell Douglas, still wary of joint ventures, pulled out before the project could move beyond the concept stage. Instead, the company returned to internal studies. In 1983, engineers proposed the D969C-10, a stretched DC-10 with a 25-foot longer fuselage and 14 feet wider wingspan. But by then, the writing was on the wall. The market had moved on, and McDonnell Douglas, once a pioneer, was now chasing trends it had once helped define. The window for a clean-sheet wide-body twin jet, the kind that could have rivaled Airbus and Boeing, was no longer financially viable. The company didn't have the capital, it didn't have the time, and it didn't have the confidence of the market. So instead of building something new, McDonnell Douglas turned to something familiar. An earlier proposal to stretch and refine the DC-10, it would be called the MD-11. And while it wasn't the twin jet the market had been waiting for, it was the only option left. But the MD-11 wouldn't be a clean-sheet design. It would be a compromise. The MD-11 entered service in 1990 with high hopes and 92 orders on the books, but it quickly ran into trouble. Fuel efficiency fell short of projections, range was limited, and the decision not to fund a new wing, a cost-saving measure by the board, meant the aircraft had no room to grow. Qantas walked away. Other airlines followed, and while the MD-11 found a second life as a freighter, its commercial prospects faded fast. By the mid-1990s, McDonnell Douglas was out of options. The company that once led the jet age had been reduced to a niche player, reliant on military contracts and legacy designs. In 1997, it was absorbed by Boeing. The DC-10 Twin never flew, but its absence was felt for decades. It was the missed opportunity that could have changed everything, and the first real sign that McDonnell Douglas was running out of altitude.